Franco. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, look, it's really quite a thrill to speak to you guys today, really, and I find it a very interesting time for us both because, you know, like this slide, sunset, you know, this is the twilight of my career. You know, I'm nearly at the end. I'll be 70 next year. It's not over yet, but, you know, let's face it, the sun is setting. But for you guys, the sun's just rising. It's just starting. Your adventure, where you're going to go, you know, it's all in your own hands now, isn't it? And I guess what I'm hoping to do today, I'm going to share with you some stories, some things that were interesting for me. But what I don't have for you is any advice. The thing about advice is, particularly with design, there's so many different possibilities and journeys that each individual in this room will have, that what worked for me might be completely irrelevant for you, or might be a complete yawn. So I can share my things, what's happened to me, and there'll be some things that you might pick up on and other things that will be irrelevant for you because the world's changed too. So I've picked a couple of words that I'm going to use to highlight some of the things that happened to me that, you know, I think you'll find interesting. And the first word here is nurture. You know, care, protect someone while they're growing. Now, my first job was with Philips Electronics. I graduated from RMIT in 1978. 46 years ago, I've been doing industrial design. And I have to say to you, you know, except for a handful of days, every day I've loved. You know, there are a few days where you go, oh, this is going to go pear-shaped. But on the whole, everything has been just a fantastic, fun job. So you couldn't hope for a better career, really, you know, if you walked in my shoes. So I started with Philips Electronics back in 1978, first job after leaving RMIT. And back then, we were on a drawing board course. So this is a bit of a history lesson as well. You can see how the profession has changed over the decades that I'm going to share with you. And you've got to speculate a little bit now about what the future holds. You know, you're going to be dramatically influenced by technology and AI and all sorts of things in the next decade or two. So it's an interesting challenge. So here's a sketch of a 16-inch portable TV set, and I did hundreds of sketches like this and really learnt to draw. And drawing's one of those things that I've always enjoyed, so I still sketch today and create ideas and use it as a fast path to bring something to fruition. But you don't have to be good at drawing. You know, there's thousands of different ways to create something, but it's a tool that's worked for me. But during my Philips days, what's really important when the word nurture is that for the first 2 years after graduating, they kept me out of harm's way. I did instruction book covers, exploded views, drawings of all sorts, but they kept me out of the heat of the kitchen. And I watched the senior designers operate. I watched how they conduct themselves in meetings. I saw how they resolve complicated problems, discussed with mechanical and electronic engineers, visited factories, learned such a lot without any pressure. And that was I guess it set the footings for my career because I was able to grow carefully and quietly while being nurtured. And if you can be so lucky. Look, you know, everyone talks about resilience, the needing to be tough. You know, how do you get that? How do you build those sort of internal strength? I don't know, really. The answers are tricky. But with resilience, this story comes to mind. This is the Victa lawnmower. And after leaving Philips, I was with Philips for 7 years, worked in Eindhoven in Holland, and came back to Australia and started Blue Sky. And we gradually started picking up clients here and there. I continued to work for Philips, actually, and I've worked for Philips for, I don't know, 30 years. Another 20 odd years after I left them. I continued to work with them as a consultant. So a wonderful influence on my life. But Victa was interesting. Victa was run by a managing director named Andrew King. And what was interesting about Andrew is he was a mechanical engineer by training. So he really understood every nut and bolt on the mower. He wasn't just a marketing guy that had gravitated to the top. He understood the brand and he understood the heritage he was holding. It's an iconic Australian brand and it stood for something. So we were designing away and we created a beautiful looking mower and we had good ergonomics and various things about it. And Andrew said to us, look, that's really good. We're very happy with how it's going, but we can't really move on to development until you can prove to me that it cuts better than all the previous Victas and cuts better than all the competitors. Okay, so that suddenly puts some heat in the kitchen. It's one thing to make a pretty mower with good ergonomics. It's another thing to make a mower that's the best mower. Okay, so what we did was we bought all the competitor mowers. We went out the back of Revesby, where there was a big oval unmowed close to the factory. We put the Honda and the Massport and the Victa down and we mowed a 20-metre stretch of grass and then we weighed all the catches. And the Victa, which had our deck, which we had created, was about the same as the others. And Andrew said, oh, that's good, but we can't move on to development. And now we've got springtime coming, because they work back from springtime. In Bunnings, you have to have the stores all loaded for the 1st of September with mowing gear. It's just the way the commercial world works. So now we've got time pressure, and we've got a mower that Andrew won't let move forward. So the deck is an involute spiral. It's a complicated piece of geometry. The blade spins in there. It creates a pressure differential that sucks the grass up and throws it into the catcher. And the involute spiral is a piece of complicated engineering. And it's a bit of a black art, it turns out. So we made a fiberglass buck. We kept changing the shape, going back out to Milpera, weighing the catches, just the same. Change the involute spiral again. What about this? What about that? Out to Milpera, weighed the same. Sometimes worse than the competitors, other times better. The hours are going by, the weeks, the stress is building. Andrew won't let it go until it's a better mower. So finally we made some changes. We had engineers working on it. We knew all about the theory of an involute spiral, but we still couldn't get it to perform better until one day we made a series of changes and it worked. And then we were able to move on with SolidWorks and build the rest of the geometry and get the thing into production, which is still in the market today, 20 years later, which is interesting, isn't it? When you do it well, it has longevity. And I'll never forget the lessons that Andrew King taught us around quality and around why make something that's pretty. It's just it's using limited resources of the planet without really doing something significant, which we did. Hubris. This is an interesting word, isn't it? You know, excessive pride and self-confidence. So we'd had a few successes back then, and I must have thought I was pretty good. And the Olympic torch tender was coming up, and I thought that'll be something that we ought to win. And I put together a good team. Had to assemble a manufacturer and an environmental specialist and all of these ologists that made up the torch relay design team. The tender came out. We did all of the research into the ancient games. We did a thorough investigation. So it wasn't just like I slapped together a tender and hoped to win. It was a deep investigation to the torch relay, what it meant. You know, the torch relay carries the sacred flame from Olympus and brings it into the stadium. But as well as doing that, it builds the cohort of support for the Olympic Games. It helps enlist volunteers. It sells tickets. It builds the whole momentum in the host country. So it's a massive PR machine, the Olympic torch. and has sponsors, you know, IBM and Coca-Cola, and they're all in it. It's a big deal. Anyway, back in 1998, the tender came out. I put together this team. I wrote all the documents. We built a lovely design, and our model makers, Box and Dice, made the most exceptional model. And then I went to SOCOG. We were shortlisted, and I said, yeah, we're getting there. This is really good. We're one of 4 firms. 40 firms pitched. You know, Ken Doane did one, Philip Cox, famous Australian architects, did a torch, Mark Newsom did a torch. Everybody had a crack at this one. So we did this model, and then on the day, I went to the selecting board at SOCOG, and I must have given a very good pitch. You know, I sort of danced across the boardroom like this, you know, and I spoke about the unique character of the torch, and I went on and on at length. You know, it's a clever bit of kit. Let me just open it up. You know, inside is a little underarm cylinder which contains propane and butane, and has a whole lot of smarts in the burner that stop it from going out. But anyway, I didn't know all that at the time, and I pitched it. And a few weeks went by, and I didn't hear anything. You know, I'm pacing up and down, put a lot of effort, unpaid work as a consultant. No one likes to do that. And finally got a call from SOCOG, the project manager, and he said, Mark, I've got some news for you. I said, yes, Joseph, what's that? And he said, Blue Sky has been selected to supply 17,000 Olympic torches to the 2000 Olympics. Congratulations. And I said, that's wonderful, Joseph. Fantastic news. And he said, well, we'll come and see you on Monday for contract signing. Great, thank you very much. And I hung up. And then I went, oh my God, what have I done? I've got no idea how to do this. You know, I pushed so hard for something that I didn't really imagine, you know, I thought I could do it. And then as I started to learn more about it, you know, it has to burn in 100-kilometre-hour winds. It, you know, had to weigh less than 1.5 kilos, had to burn a clean burn, no emissions. The list went on of compliance and the contract and the whole thing, and I'm going, oh my God, why aren't I just doing mowers? So there you are. And what happened after that was, I guess I call it the Olympic spirit, because everybody that came to work on this project did the best work of their careers. You've never seen anything like it. John Harrington, the manufacturer, I'll never forget him. He really saved me. He helped solve so many problems. You know, things just dropped together on the Olympic Torch project. I've never seen a project like it since, where every problem we came up to went, oh, how are we going to solve the switch? What's going to happen when the burner? And Adelaide University did some fantastic work. They had it in wind tunnels, and they tested its performance and drawdown under certain conditions. When the wind's blowing across it, will it lick down and lick someone's hand? It had to be a fluorescent flame that the media could see from 2 kilometres off with their cameras, all these sorts of stuff. Anyway, it's history, and I got away with it, is all I'll say. Another good word is purpose. You know, as a consultant, we did lots of different projects, and some of them were quite inspirational and others were less so. You know, you're just working for money at some point, where you're helping a client make money. The project's okay, but it's just a living, really. It's not really what drives you and gets you out of bed. All the time you still say, well, you've got to maintain your professional ethics. And I was always enthusiastic about every project, because somebody's paying us, you know, we owe them to give it our very best thought and energies into it as a professional. It's what you do. But occasionally projects came along where you really had a purpose. And for us it was Cochlear, because, you know, as opposed to making watering cans for Yates or something like that, You know, it's a nice sort of thing, a watering can, isn't it? But with Cochlear, we found it a bit more profound, because if we did a good job and we recognised that industrial design, you know, it's one of the little cogs in the wheel, that all of the science behind the implant, the engineering, the clinical research that goes into a bionic ear is massive. And industrial design is the usability, the comfort and fit, the aesthetics, all of those aspects. But it's only, at max 2%, isn't it? But at the end of the work, you sort of feel, well, I worked on the Cochlear products and I contributed to their experience for those people that are profoundly deaf, and I think we improved it. And that sort of is worthwhile. Emerging's a good one too, because as Blue Sky rattled along, we'd won the torch, we were starting to get some quite big clients. And it was sort of an interesting thing for me that big clients attracted big clients. And I often wondered when we were, you know, we had a studio in William Street, Paddington, you know, the biggest job we had might have gone for 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, what are we going to do? And I was often thinking, why is it I don't get those jobs that go for a year? You know, where are those jobs? Who's doing them? And why isn't it us? And, you know, it took 20 years before we were in a position, 20 years before the big jobs were coming. So, you know, you've got to hand it to industrial designers like me for patience and grit, because it takes a long time. But anyway, this is the journey I had, and I'm sure others have done it faster than that. But one of the next big one was Qantas. And in 2012 or 13, Alan Joyce said, well, look, we park 737s up at the gate, so do Virgin. You know, our staff are trained to be friendly, our meals are slightly better, but we've got nothing to compete on. So we need to change the experience from when you step across the threshold into the terminal till when you take a seat in the plane. We have to streamline it, make it delightful. And so this was the next gen check-in, and that was our brief. So suddenly we went from being industrial designers where we might have got a brief to do this thing or to do that thing, this is the bag drop, but this time we got a brief from crossing the threshold door to the plane, every touch point, and that's experience design. And that sort of changed things for us. We then weren't just object focused, we were looking at the digital experience, looking at the comms, looking at the wayfinding, and the whole thing was quite an adventure because we were also had much bigger fees. We could employ specialists in all of those areas, digital guys, graphic teams, ergonomists, studying CTV footage of behaviours. We knew where people moved in the terminal, how they trafficked through, what the blocking points were. We engaged with software engineers. We worked with Amadeus, which is the big program that runs all of the airlines. We had to piggyback onto that, and we put together this next-gen check-in with lots of other members, you know, like I've mentioned, software and the others, numbers of engineering and builders to transform every terminal across Australia for Qantas. Where before that, there was a desk and some clever architects had done lovely joinery, and this was way beyond joinery. It wasn't about doing lovely custom wood, you know, painted desks. It was about understanding behaviours and navigation and systems and rethinking it. So once we did this, it transformed Qantas too. And it was interesting, retail sales in the terminals all went up by 30% when this was installed in all of the terminals, because frequent flyers get there and they normally thought they had 30 minutes to wait in the queue to put their bags in, to put the tag on, and all of that palaver that they went through. They only had 5 minutes for shopping. So when the next check-in came in, they walked straight through and they had an extra 30 minutes to shop. So all of the sales went straight up. So all sorts of funny things happened, and it changed behaviours in all of the terminals. And now it's just, you know, it's a given. You check in at home, but the bag drop is still doing a lot of good work. And then from there we continued in this vein, and we did a lot of work for Commonwealth Bank. And it was an interesting thing because they had been used to hiring firms, you know, good architectural design firms, Woods, Bagot and the like, to do their branches. And they had probably based, I don't know, their methodology different to ours. So we did an investigation, and we wanted to deeply understand CBA customers. We did all of the interviews. We met with all of the different types of customers. We created personas, we mapped, we did all of the stuff to deeply understand each type of customer's journey going into the bank. And then we changed the whole bank around and proposed that what we wanted to do was make a streamlined experience for somebody that we called fast money. And they don't want to go to the bank at all. Fast money just want to get in, get the contract signed and get out. So how do we enable that? And then we had others that would go in on pension day. They'd meet, you know, Marjorie and then have a coffee afterwards, and they would love to chat in the queue of the bank. You know, how do we make it a rich experience for them too? You know, because if we streamlined it completely, well, they wouldn't be able to chat. So there was all sorts of things that you had to understand, and the bank had never done this sort of research before. They'd never done user-centered design. And it was really quite interesting, and they enjoyed the journey because the CBA didn't know as much about their customers as we did. They'd done hundreds of hours of market research. They knew which demographic bought which home loan and which insurance package. They knew all of that stuff, but they didn't do any face-to-face, a designer meeting a customer, understanding their needs, and then writing some notes. And that was massive. So we really enjoyed the CBA thing. And then the years are going on now. Now I must be coming up for 30 years with Blue Sky. And I was starting to get fatigued, never of design, but of the business cut and thrust, put it that way. You know, quoting, you have to haggle a bit. You know, then you have to deliver the work, and there's expectations and all of the stuff that isn't really to do with designing things. You know, managing staff, looking after people's holidays, and, you know, somebody's sick right when we've got to present that morning, you know. So after 30 years, we're starting to get a bit tired of that. And I was very fortunate enough that Monash University had a vacancy for a research professor, and oh gee, it was just a breath of fresh air. So I took a job at Monash to help run the Health Co-Lab, which is a medtech research lab. And suddenly I didn't have to worry about sick leave or my billings targets every month, you know, to keep the rent and the salaries and, you know, all the stuff that goes on to run a business. You know, you've got to chat to your accountant and all of that. No, all I had to worry about now was design. And that changed me, actually. I suddenly had new spring in my step. And I was often down in Melbourne. That's where their campus is, at Caulfield. And this is an example of one of the projects that we did, and this is the Bionic Eye project. And it's a piece of technology that is to restore sight. So somebody that's got damaged eyes and can't see, this device is intended to restore their sight. And it has a cortical implant in the back of the head, which is the visual cortex of the brain. So it's not unlike Cochlear in that it has an implant. It has a camera embedded into the glasses at the front, like an iPhone camera, and then it has a processor that distills that down into a series of dots so that somebody that is profoundly blind can see shapes of tables and individuals and people. And we worked on this for several years, and it was sort of very uplifting to work on projects like this. But we had multiple projects, you know, including working for the blood bank and for hospitals with problems during COVID and hand hygiene. And they were all projects that were really a great deal of fun. And the team were enthusiastic. They were young grads, some PhD students in the team. So that was sort of good for me as well, because I was surrounded with people that were going, yeah, we could try that. And if it was a dead end, you know, we'd go down a path thinking, this could work, let's try it. And it didn't work. Now, at Blue Sky, that's a disaster. But in a university, you go, well, okay, what we know now is that doesn't work. Let's go somewhere else. And that for me was very refreshing, to be able to fail. And look, I had thousands of failures at Blue Sky, I can tell you. But to be able to fail in a comfortable way and go, okay, let's try something else, let's go down another path, was really quite, refreshing. Now, the most important thing of the slideshow really is the people, isn't it? And I probably didn't give this enough thought on my journey. You know, it's only now I'm reflecting and I look back, which is one of the things that's great about our discussion today. I'm at the end and I've got 20/20 hindsight. I can look back at what was great, where I was weak. I can see all of that. It's crystal. And I was weak with people. I didn't spend enough time. I was so focused on the object, the product, the deliverable, the clients. I missed a lot of the gold. But I know now, it's late, but better late than never. And I almost cry when I show you this slide. Look at me, my voice has gone croaky. But I'll mention a few of these because they're interesting. Here's John Harrington from Harrington's, the manufacturer of the Olympic torch. He got a run, quite rightly. And he was a funny guy and did wonderful work. Just one anecdote is that the media was not to find out anything about the Olympic torch before its release. It has a launch date and everything had to be hush-hush. We had to keep the blinds shut in the office. We had Channel 9 perched across the street with telephoto lenses trying to look in the studio. It was unbelievable. And while this is all going on, I'm asking John, how's it going? How's it going? He said, oh yeah, good. We did some tests yesterday. I said, tests? What sort of tests? He said, me and my wife, we lit it up in the national park. She's got an open-top BMW. And we went for a burn through the park to see if it would go out. I said, oh, John, don't tell me you did that. No! You know, because there were so many clauses in the contract. I'd be sued into oblivion. Anyway, he tested, said, it was great, Mark, fantastic. I nearly had kittens. And this is Rob Pataki. He's recently passed away, but he hired me at Philips, who I'll never forget. And this guy, Peter Haythornthwaite, he's a New Zealander, very famous industrial designer. And he ran a program in Australia called the Design Integration Program, which was about embedding design thinking in small businesses. And I was part of that program. And he taught me how to change a company. And that's interesting because I'd sort of gone from being objects to experiences, now to companies. How can you design a company? And he taught me how to take an SME that's design blind and instill those values and those processes to make them design led. And that is a piece of black art as well. So I'll never forget him. This is my bookkeeper, Sue Osborne, who kept Blue Sky in the black for decades. Don't know how she did it. And Henry Spale, who runs Blue Sky these days, I've retired from Blue Sky. Not retired from designing, but retired from the cut and thrust of consulting. I'm over that. And look, my long-suffering wife in the top right. What a girl. I mean, gee, she's a good egg, isn't she? Because she's seen me, you know, do all-nighters in the studio, all sorts of stuff. I've been on planes here and there and all of the stuff that comes with running a company. And she enabled a lot of that stuff to happen. So, of course, she's marvellous. And Stefano Mazzano here, director of Philips. What a genius. He was an absolute genius. And he proposed the iPhone to the Philips board 5 years before Jobs. It gives you a shiver. Now, Philips are all but gone. This thing took them. They had factories making speakers, turntables. They made TV sets, and they're a massive billion-dollar company. Largely gone. Jobs. And this man would have saved them. He proposed it to the board, but they were small men. Nervous. That'll never happen. So that's some of the faces. And really there are hundreds of people that helped me, supported me, gave me advice that, you know, I'm going to be forever indebted to. Now that's all I've got to tell you.
Thank you.
Anyone got any comments or questions, concerns? Yeah, go ahead.
What was one of your most difficult moments you had in developing yourself as a designer?
Oh, difficult moment. I mean, that's an ongoing thing. It isn't a single time. I think everybody has their own internal fears and lack of confidence at any one time. I've done a lot of industrial design, but I'm still learning. And I'm amazed at how little I know. So I'm further down the track than you, but I'm just on the same track. So I get times where I go, I don't know what I'm going to do here. This is tricky. And I think that's one of the things about industrial design that's sort of wonderful too, because there are jobs where you do the same thing. You know, let's say I was working in an appliance company. I work at Breville, and you've done already 10 coffee makers, and then you get asked to do your 11th. Well, that's sort of a thing where you can sort of, okay, I know what I'm doing. You don't really have to dig deep and challenge yourself, but often you do, and it's something that you've never done before, and you're not in your comfort zone, and you question your own ability. Can I do this? You know, maybe it's better for somebody else. We all have self-doubts, and I guess you just push on. And most times it works out. And usually if you ask the right people for help, it does sort itself.
And then Ian.
Cool. When you look back in your career, it seems like there's an amazing level of trust that companies put in you to innovate and experiment, for you to do things that have never really been done before. But I feel like now it seems that we're in a design world where it feels like everything has sort of been done before, or it's totally oversaturated. So I guess do you still feel like there's the same capacity for innovation into the future?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. You are in a different world, and there are complexities with your world that I didn't have back then. That's for sure. I think the spirits, I think it's still the same though. It's like writing songs. There's always a new beat. Somebody does something. And what seems like saturation, you know, what Arthur de Bono once told me, he hired me at Monash. He said, design is all about synthesis. You know, we rarely create something new ourselves. We bring things together as designers. And I think that's where the newness comes from. So what'll likely happen in your world is that there'll be somebody's created some app that has some sort of resonance with your problem. And then you'll put that together with something else. And that leads to the newness. So I think it'll be things like that. That's where I've always found that I've been able to create from, is never from ground up. It just doesn't happen for industrial designers. We're never going to create a new membrane technology that's going to enable transition of chemicals through the skin without a hypodermic. You know, it's not our domain. But once somebody's created the membrane, then we can apply it to something and give it legs and grow it. And I think that's where the truth has always been. And I think it'll always be there. So you've got to use the same processes as I used, I think, is harness all those things. And you might have to do more filtering than I did. You know, there's so much white noise, isn't there? And perhaps the art form that you'll need is to distill. What are the things, what are the items that I need to include in my research? What are the things I need to say goodbye to? And maybe your art form is going to require more focus in order to bring things into your domain that will stimulate that newness. But it's a good question, and I don't really know the answer. I'm just giving you some thoughts.
There, and then...
Oh, sorry.
What do you think...
Speak up.
What?
Speak up.
What do you think gave you the edge when you got that first job with Philips?
The first job with Philips was interesting because Rob Pataki here was working at Philips, but he was also lecturing at RMIT. So he was one of my lecturers. And I think I sort of idolised him, really. I was watching him so closely and enjoying everything he had to say that, I worked as hard as I could, but I was loving it. It didn't, for me then, it wasn't work, and still isn't. So I just put everything into everything I did with him and just enjoyed it, really, and didn't realise it was a job at the end of it. I wasn't sort of thinking, oh, he works at Philips, I'll get a job at Philips, I'm going to work hard here. I just loved the work that we were doing together, and everything he said had such relevance to me because it was, he was referencing things he was working on at Philips. And then he'd say, okay, now I want you guys to do this, and we worked together on things. And it was very, very real and quite exciting. So what happened then is he could see probably in my eyes that I was jumping out of my skin with enthusiasm for it. And I don't think I was any better than anyone else in the class. It wasn't that, because, I was a bit of a hack, I think. But he gave me the job. He said, come along and work, do a school holiday thing over Christmas. Come and work in the studio at Philips. And I did, and really I just loved it. And I never looked back from there, really. And yeah, he was one of those guys that helped nurture and support me during that time. Yeah, great.
At the beginning, you were talking about how we're faced with quite a turbulent future with like innovation. If you could put yourself in a situation where you'd be like 20 years old again right now, what are the fundamental skills, and particularly soft skills, that you would need to learn, or like you would tell yourself, oh, I need to learn this right now?
Yeah.
What would they be?
Well, the first thing is I would say, where do I want to be? And then match the skills to that. So, you know, I think if I was in your shoes now, knowing what I know, isn't that an interesting thing, you know? Imagine that if someone could tap me on the shoulder. Well, I do things differently, but I don't have any regrets. I think the skills I would do, I mean, I think I would like to be in a startup, because I've done the big business thing, and now I'd try and do something newer, different. So I'd set myself up with some skills for startup. I want to be more digitally savvy than I was, and I think I would learn some more of those business skills and find a subject that I love in that startup, and then build the skills around that. The design skills, I don't think there's anything much I've got to teach you or advise you. You know the things, you know how to research, you know how to use CAD, you know how to prototype, you know all that stuff. There's nothing there that I can teach you. The thing you've got to learn is, what is it you want? Where's the place you want to spend your time and energy? And if you can identify that, and that's hard enough, isn't it? In this white noise of opportunities that you've got before you. Pick an area, you know, like in recent times I liked medtech. So I definitely went that way because I found for me it was a real purpose. So if you said, okay, medtech's for me, then you want to learn all about that. You know, engaging with clinicians, learning as much as you can about the subject matter that you want to master. And they're the skills you need. It's not so much design skills, because this place arms you with those. It's the deep investigation as to what in your heart is going to make the job a thrill for you. You know, what am I going to do? And for me, I think I'd like to be in a small group, a startup, and switch the thing to turbo, knowing that it has a very high percentage failure rate. You know, like it's not a safe path, is it? And I think you can afford to do those sorts of things when you're young. You know, like if you're lucky enough, you don't have children and mortgages and on. Take some risks, have a crack at different things, and maybe you've got to do it 2 or 3 times. You know, I rattled along. I had corporate life, consulting, university. I did try a few things, but you guys will try way more than that. I think mine's very conservative, linear sort of thing, isn't it? And, you know, I think my son, I've watched him and he's changing jobs, he's doing this and that. You know, I hold on to my hat, you know. And that'll be your path, which will be different to mine.
Yes, down the back. Behind Ian.
Okay. I'm wondering, like, in what ways did you find your design philosophies influencing the way you run business?
That's a tough question. That's a tough question, because I want to say it was everything. My philosophy flowed through, you know, quality, integrity, everything. But in truth, it isn't really like that, as much as I wish it was. You know, the running of the business, you know, I guess you want to be, there's some attributes you need to have to run a business successfully. And humble is one of them. You know, the best CEOs are humble. They're quiet, they work the best, and that humbleness flows through the organisation. I don't know that I was. I think I probably had times where I was. But in reflection, I was focused a lot on the money. I worried about the finances too much. It all came good in the end. There was nothing to worry about. We made plenty of money. But I worried overly about that. And I think my philosophy was always around, you know, research underpinning design, deeply understanding end users and engaging that way. And with the business, I guess to a certain extent it was influenced by that. You know, we were methodical. You know, I was careful to a certain extent with how I managed the team. But look, I don't think I was a star. I think I was a hack as a manager, in truth. I could have done a lot better job if I was 20 again and had a team, if you gave me another shot at it. But back then, I didn't know a lot about how to look after people, and I didn't give it enough attention, as I've already said. So I guess the philosophy of design was about human-centered, putting the person first. And then in the design studio, did I do that? Probably not. So there's a lesson there.
In front of Ian and then down the back.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to bring products to market for like my first time, and I've never interacted with manufacturers before. So I was wondering, what is your advice to finding manufacturers, interacting with them, and getting advice from them to refine your product and send it back to them, and then kind of make it so it's a manufacturable product?
Tomorrow morning. Yeah, you've got to get on that. So it's very important, you know, that you start engaging early, because they'll have an influence on your outcome. And obviously you've got your creative processes that deliver the ideation and what you want to do. But the earlier you engage with the real world about the making, the better, because it won't do you any harm. You'll get some inputs, some positive, some negative. It'll influence how you bring it to market. So I've always tried to engage early, because there's always a great fear. Like the Olympic torch is a classic, isn't it? You know, we rushed it through as a tender, built the torch as well as we could, and then weren't really sure how to make it. And then I had a big problem on my hands. But in your case, you don't have those sort of pressures. So I'd start talking to manufacturers. You know, you've got to look after your IP and those sorts of things. So, you know, do your housekeeping, make sure that the intellectual property is protected before you share it too widely with people you don't know. So you've got to make sure you have a rapport with manufacturers, that they understand the circumstance that they're in. They're being offered an opportunity to engage on something that's not commercialised yet. So there's a lot of groundwork you need to do with them to bring them into your world, if you like. And when that's done, then you can start to engage, and it'll strengthen your output for sure.
Ahmed?
You spoke a lot about your design career post-university. So I'm interested how your upbringing before university influenced your design practice and philosophy.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that is interesting for me. I don't know whether you'll find it interesting. But, well, I went to school and I rattled around the middle, and I struggled at HSC, and didn't get good enough marks. I got into surveying. It was about my 4th preference. Oh, goody, surveying. I had architecture, industrial design, planning, surveying. Okay, so I went off and did surveying. And at the end of the first semester, they pulled me aside and said, look, this isn't going to work out. You know, you're better off to leave now before you fail at the mid-year. And it was really good advice. So I said, thank you. I'll keep my credentials as no failure on my copybook. And I went over and saw the industrial design lecturers and chatted to them. And back then at RMIT, you had to have a portfolio. And my marks probably were borderline, but I didn't have a portfolio. Lots of the other kids had done tech drawing and art at HSC level, and they had a portfolio. They don't have that anymore, I don't think. But anyway, back then, this is how it was. So I didn't get in. So anyway, I went and spoke to the lecturers, and really, if I had a photo of Bruce Cooper, who was that lecturer back at RMIT, he would be on the board, because he said to me, well, look, you know, your marks are okay, but we don't know that you've got the makings of an industrial designer. He said, you can sit in on my Thursday night master's class if you want to. And we're doing some drawing and other things. You can participate, and you might be able to build up some work that you could use for submitting the next year. So I sat in his class, and well, I was at home. This is where I needed to be. Straight away, I was just sketching and drawing and watching him and learning, you know. And he knew that I knew that he knew that I was going to be an industrial designer one way or the other. And so next year, you know, I was admitted without any trouble and went on. But it was a rocky road. It wasn't a straightforward path for me to get into industrial design.
Yeah, front and then Louise.
Do you ever find, or did you ever find yourself having to convince people of the importance of industrial design for their, like, not necessarily, like, the clients that you're engaging with, and especially in the medtech space, where you're having to justify the value of your presence there? I feel like sometimes industrial design can be swallowed up into, like, engineering, and it may not feel as valuable to clients. Have you found that?
100%.
How do you overcome that?
Really, I would like $1 for every time I've had to pitch the importance of industrial design. Yeah, I mean, the world has changed, so it's come a long, long way. But there was time where I did have to pitch it very hard to manufacturers in particular, the importance of design. But any company that doesn't employ designers and understand the value of design now is a dead duck. So they're finished, aren't they? We know it. But there are individuals and people out there that just think they can just start making something, and, you know, they really deserve to be in the cave, don't they? You know, that I have pitched it many times where I've said, listen, there were cases, I forget, there was somebody that was going to retool the same mould as last time, that sort of thing. We know it works, let's just do it again. I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, you're going to spend $250,000 on a new tool, let's make it fantastic. And industrial design can improve the usability, we can make it, you know, recyclable, all sorts of things. I just saw Douglas Tompkin here. Here he is. You should be up here, Douglas. We did some great work, and Douglas was an influence on my career as well. Very pleased to see you here, Douglas. Don't laugh.
I'll work with you later. Eloise?
I just have a question about your approach with Commonwealth.
Yes.
You mentioned that they hadn't engaged with systems of design before. How did you go about approaching that business if they hadn't engaged with that previously?
The Combank story is really hilarious. I mean, yeah, it is. It's a funny story. Blue Sky was, and still is, will probably carry on being for many years to come. It's a small industrial design consultancy. It doesn't show up on, you know, outside of industrial design anywhere. And the Combank didn't seek us out and say, "Hey, we've got to have Blue Sky come and do our," you know, wouldn't that be nice? But it didn't work that way. The way it worked is just hilarious. I was in the office and we'd finished Qantas and that was going very well. I was thinking, geez, that was incredible experience, but it's coming to an end. You know, we want to do another one of those. That was a hoot. Does anybody know anybody? I was sitting around, we had an open plan. Does anybody know anyone at the Combank? And Justin, Wagemaker, sitting right next to me, said, "Yeah, I know a guy." I said, "Who do you know?" He said, "Oh, Ralph." Oh, I forget his name. And he was the managing director. And I said, "Geez, how do you know him?" And he said, "Oh, he used to live next door to us. It's Mum and Dad's place." "Okay, could you write to him?" Just said, "Yeah, sure." So Justin dropped the CEO of Combank a note saying he works for Blue Sky, the user-centred design specialist, and it could be good for the bank. Could he connect us? And then Justin sent that email off to Ralph, and then we got a call from, what's his name now? He's just retired from NAB. Oh, I forget his name. But anyway, the number 2 man in the Combank rang us and wanted to know if we could come in and have a chat. And so we went in and met the head of retail banking, and I explained the user-centred design methodology and what we would do. I managed to think on my feet and put together some good thinking, and he said, "That's what we need." Put in a formal proposal. So then I wrote a small book on everything we were going to do, explained in great detail the methodology, the teams I was going to hire, how I was going to go from being a small firm to give global best practice to the CBA. And he said, "Get on with it." So look, that's a classic case of just straight luck. And then we got ANZ after that, but that wasn't luck. So you have some things that are lucky and unlucky in your career. And every now and again, you just happen to be in the right spot at the right time.
At the front here.
Has hubris ever been your undoing?
Oh, you know, being cocksure, you know. I don't think it's ever undone me. I mean, I went close here, didn't I? With the Olympic torch. But I think it, you know, that humble trait is far better. And you're far more successful if you can be like that, because you don't miss things. Because you're still looking with curious, you know, beginner's eyes at things. If you can maintain that, that's a gift, isn't it? You know, that you can look at something with fresh eyes and go, "No, not like we can do that." And I think that's how I try and approach each design project, in that same way. You know, even though I've done lots of things before, you still go, "Oh, what have we got here?" You know, and that's sort of not being too full of yourself, because we're all quite, look, how fragile are we? And you don't ever want to overly believe in yourself, but it's a balance, isn't it? You've got to be confident too, because, you know, as industrial designers, we have to write to the CEO, explain to the CEO why he or she needs to do this. And so you can't be meek You have to have a voice, you have to have some confidence, but it's a balance, isn't it? That if you go too far, you damage your capability and you miss important opportunities. So I imagine I have missed some, you know, in truth, but hopefully not too many.
Somewhat related to that, do you think this discipline attracts an inordinate number of anxious perfectionists?
Oh, God, yeah.
Do you think this discipline attracts a lot of anxious perfectionists?
That's a great question. And look, I don't think industrial design's anything special. There's plenty of courses that have anxious people in them and perfectionists. Look, perfectionism isn't that a scourge? I mean, I certainly know now that it's an imperfect world. It's an imperfect world. And if you strive for perfectionism the whole time, you don't get anything done. And that wonderful thing is, you know, that what might have come from Stanford, you know, fail early, fail fast, that sort of thing. And I quite like some of those methodologies that they use where they knock something up, have a look at it, have it fail, knock another few things up quickly, try it, use post-it notes, try this, use cardboard, meet end users, conduct interviews early, find out what people think fail. So I quite like that approach, you know, learning by making. So not trying to go, you know, it's perfect and then show it to somebody, because it does build anxiousness, because you've got so much effort and energy into something you've tried to make perfect, and you're better off to try and relax a little bit, share your thinking and your ideas with lots of people. I tell you, when I design something, I've got 3 or 4 ideas on the table, and I've got no idea which is the good one when I've designed it. When somebody else designs it, I'm full of opinions. But when I've designed it, I've quite confused which of these 4 is any good, and I need to interact with other people. Everybody's different. That's just how I work, and so I need to interact. I know it's imperfect, and I hear other people's thoughts and ideas, and I think it's that way I get to a good design here. I don't know that I can ever do it without a team and people around me. I'm not capable. I know I need the input of others. That's why I love this studio. You've got stuff up there, people walk past and can laugh, and then they can come back and go, why don't you try that? You know, it's so much better for you. And that perfectionism thing is a burden. I mean, you want to aim for quality and do your best work, yes, and I've struggled with that my whole career, still trying to get things right. You have to have some of that in you to be an industrial designer, to keep going. When everybody else has left, you're still trying to get that right. So there's a bit of that you've got to maintain, but you can see that balance I'm talking about. If you can somehow strike a balance that doesn't make you anxious.
I'm really interested in knowing what it was like when you were first sort of starting Blue Sky. Like, what are the sorts of people that you looked to be in there at the start? You talked a lot about people and
yeah,
that kind of stuff.
Well, people are really, it's very important, and I don't know that I fully understood it at the start. The people I surrounded myself with at the start were sort of serendipitous. You know, they were in my little world, and so we joined and got going, and it worked, and we gradually started to hire with more intent. And my old boss at Philips, he was up there too, one of the things he taught me, he said, whenever you hire someone, the most important thing is, you know, are they a good person? Do you like them? And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because at Philips, he could choose from everybody across the whole planet would come and send their portfolios to him. And he'd sort of look them in the eye and chat to them and go, you know, you're a good person. You're going to fit in with us. Because it didn't matter so much about their skills, because everybody can learn those. It's just that who you are. And so that's the thing that I did learn. And I learned it from him. Whenever I hired, I first wanted to make sure that I sort of liked them. Okay, so you know, if you're doing an interview, having the tech skills and the processes and all of the stuff, and even having passion for the category is good, but you've got to have a rapport with the people you're working with. That means you're in that team, you love the work, you're going to be someone that everyone's going to enjoy working with. It doesn't mean you have to be the life of the party. Nobody wants that. But you've got to be somebody that you go, oh yeah, that'll be good. I could work with you. We could have some fun together and, you know, do some good things. It was always how I thought of it. Will we have some fun? Will we get some great work done? And you know, obviously I wanted somebody with good technical skills. That would be good if they could do all the things. And these days I think it's a given. You know, like I've said before, you come from this institution, you're trained with all of those skills, you know how to design. And it's now the other things that make you the person, that make you interesting to an employer, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Was there anything in particular that helps you consistently inspire you through your designs?
Yeah, look, all sorts of things. I mean, inspiration, sometimes you've got, you know, the blank paper syndrome. You put down a blank piece of paper, you know, you've got your markers and your pens, or you've got your idea, or it might be in this blank screen, you know, what are we going to do? You've got to stimulate your brain, haven't you, to get it cooking. And I think that's the thing that, for inspiration, I would, you know, when we had the studio in Paddington, I would go for a walk at lunchtimes and get around, look in the galleries and talk to as many people as I could, go to trade shows, visit exhibitions, meet artists, engineers, talk to people. That's the great thing about industrial design, isn't it, is all of that interaction. You can feel like your young minds, they're sponges. You can just take it in. That's fantastic. And when you've got a project, like, you know, even today I'm working on something, and you're skipping along and you're going like this and you go, well, that's interesting. You know, you can't help yourself. And keep doing that. That's the thing. You know, it drives my wife mad. You know, we're walking somewhere, and I do a lot of work, still do for Street Furniture Australia, and we're walking along and, you know, I'm just going, what's that, you know? And Teresa's saying, for goodness sakes, just keep walking.
Yep.
So inspiration comes from all those sorts of things. You can't help it.
Yep.
When you're a designer, you just got to keep looking at stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, how do you approach sensitive topics that are prone to like stigmatization? Like, how do you make it socially acceptable? That's the kind of thing that I'm trying to work around, and it's like, especially in the medical device field. Like, for example, like your product that you made with Cochlear.
I missed the first part of your question. So.
How do you approach sensitive topics that are prone to stigmatization?
Oh, yeah. Well, sensitive subjects. I mean, we had those at Monash, and so I can only give you most of my projects, I don't know that they were that sensitive, but at Monash University, some of them were, and we were guided by ethics, and the university had, you know, whole processes around ethics. And to do no harm is what it really means, to do no harm. So that I think if you're doing it as a a project and your governing principle is do no harm, I think if you write that as a headline, and then you can then ask yourself the question, will this interview cause harm? Will this engagement, disenfranchise, isolate, frighten a subject, yes or no? So I think I would use that do no harm as a primary guideline to what each activity you do in your design process. And since you don't, that's what ethics in the university does. It checks that the researchers can do no harm via their design intervention. So if you can do the same thing with your processes and your project, and if there is a risk of harm, then you've got to ask yourself, what is the benefit? How big is the gain from that risk? Does the gain outweigh the risk? It's a real risk analysis sort of thing, isn't it? And you've got to consult widely with your colleagues about this, because various opinions are very important with making these sorts of sensitive decisions. Don't do it on your own. Collaborate closely, have partners in this subject matter, make sure you're all in agreement, you've consulted widely before you take an action. It's underpinned by process. I think that's the approach I would take.
Okay, we've got one question here and then just one other question.
Just one more after that. Anyone?
Alright.
Okay, back to that. Okay.
You could argue that you've reached a level of mastery in the context of the design industry. There's a quote by Robert Greene, he talks about mastery being the ability to easily go into the flow state, and this idea of like being able to become completely absorbed within the task that you're doing. Do you align with that in that sense, that you find a skill to become completely absorbed in the task?
Well, there's two things there. Mastery, I don't think, I've had a lot of action, but I don't think mastery is what I would describe myself as. Because, I get a design brief, I'm working on something at the moment, and I don't consider myself a master at this subject. I think everybody is learning. I think if you're just doing the same thing, you might become a master. Let's say if you're an orthopedic surgeon and you do knees day and night, you sort of become a master at that. Industrial design isn't like that, I haven't found. So I don't ever consider myself a master. But as to getting absorbed into the subject matter, yes. So I think that's one of the only ways to really do great work, is if you become absorbed by it. You have to sort of live it for a while you're working on that particular project. If it's a chair or whatever it is, you're very mindful of it, and you can't help but see the world through this sort of project lens. And it does affect me when I'm working on a project. I can't help it. It's in my psyche. I'm doing other things, but I'm thinking about this other project. It's always there. And therefore, anything I see stimulates that. I take notes. That could be interesting for my project. So I think that being immersed is not a bad thing. It enables you to harvest thinking and ideas and pull it all together. I don't think it's like a negative. Sometimes it can be if that's all you ever think about. Anybody that's too obsessed with one thing or another. But for me, I become sort of obsessed for a little while on a subject in order to fulfill my role as an industrial designer, and then I move on and do something else. And that's sort of how I work. So it's two things. Mastery, nah, I don't think that's me. But I like the idea of being immersed in the subject matter, and it's fun because you can sort of go from being blind in a subject. You know, I did a catheter, you know, worked on one, I should say, and it's a medical device, you know, for urinary conditions, and the subjects were in pain, and it's a difficult, awkward sort of subject. It is a bit of a sensitive one, back to your point over there. But, you know, I had to learn a lot about it, and it was interesting as I learned about it in order to design things to do with it.
Last question.
With the knowledge and experience you've accumulated over your career, what's a piece of advice you would give your younger designer self?
Oh, I'm sorry, my hearing's not so good. What was that again?
With all the knowledge and experience you've accumulated within your career, what's a piece of advice you would give your younger designer self?
Oh, yeah, okay. That's the one that I said at the start, I didn't have any advice. Oh, well, the most important thing, I guess, I worried too much about stuff. So I would tell my younger self, don't chill all that. It's all going to be fine in the end. You know, don't worry about that. I worried overly about lots of things that I shouldn't have. I think I would have spent more time with people and been kinder. You know, I probably was rushing around too much with focusing on design and not enough attention. So I would do that more, spend a bit more time. And I think I could have done more nurturing than I did. I was nurtured, and I think I tried, but I think it was a pretty imperfect job I did. And that's why I've sort of enjoyed my time at Monash, because I had another chance to nurture and to let others grow slowly and learn. So I think I would tell my younger self, firstly, don't chill the small stuff, don't sweat that. You know, the billings are fine, it's all going to work out well. Relax, keep designing. I mean, the failures and things where things went wrong, you know, I had a few of those, don't worry. I don't know that I could have done much more, except I think that same thing. In the end, even when I failed, there was a few things that went wrong. I probably took it too hard. The caravan moved on within, you know, 5 minutes. When you make a mistake and you haven't done a good job, it hasn't worked out, you know. I took it very personally and was sort of felt mortally wounded, you know. But look, the industry partner went, okay, don't worry about it, carry on, you know. So yeah, I think some things, you know, you think are massive problems, and they're not. They're not.
Okay. Do I need that? No, probably not. Okay. So, thank you, Mark. That was
my pleasure.
Absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.